Hey, Joe.
I got you. I'll talk to him.
You see that?
Q&A? Yeah.
Okay, we're just a couple more minutes. I apologize for the delay, folks. Gerard, can you tell me when we're good?
Jamie, did you see the
Yeah.
Q&A coming in? Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
That's been taken care of.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
A lot of trouble getting it.
Okay, this is Jamie Bova. We're gonna get started, and I'm just gonna go over a few things before I hand it over to start the presentations. One is that it may be easier for everyone to turn their Zoom onto speaker view, because there will be, there's a number of people, a very high number of people on this call, and B, there will be presentations being shared. And I do ask that everyone mutes their microphone unless they are speaking, so that the presentations are able to stay up on the screen. And I also am going to ask that everyone try to hold comment and question until the end of each individual presentation. And then when we get to the end of each individual presentation, just raise your hand using the button in the participants column, and I will call on you in the order that you've raised your hand. And there will be time for public comment at the end, but that is, I will address how that happens when we get to the end of the presentations. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. We have the full council on the call, I believe, and I believe also the full school committee, as well as city manager and other city staff. And we have the superintendent and other school staff, as well as the general treasurer and representatives from RIDE. So thank you to everyone that made time for this call. I am going to hand off the mic to the general treasurer, Seth Magaziner. He is going to give the first presentation. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Mayor. I hope everyone can hear me. Thumbs up. Okay. Well, I want to start just by congratulating all of you on the great work you're doing. You know, I know that this conversation has been going on for years, that there have been years of discussion and debate and new concepts being developed. And, you know, you're now at a point where your stage 2 application is on the verge of final approval, and you as a community are on the verge of deciding whether or not you wish to move forward with what will certainly be one of the largest projects in a generation or more for the city. And so I just want to thank everyone for their great work in getting this far. I've been very impressed in the conversations I've had, you know, with the city administration, the school administration, the council. Everyone's taking this seriously, asking good questions. And I also want to commend all of you on your leadership during this very challenging time as we as a state and we as a community deal with the COVID-19 crisis. I have been following what's going on in Newport, and I think under very challenging circumstances, you're doing a great job adapting to what's going on, preparing to reopen, supporting your residents and your businesses. And you know, I can just say, I think dealing with a crisis is difficult, but just as difficult is continuing the normal business of government during a crisis, which is what you're doing tonight. So seriously, very impressed by everything that you all are doing. I gather that I was invited to speak tonight in my capacity as a chair of the statewide school building task force. This was the task force that the governor put together a couple years ago. We developed the bonus system, which I know is very relevant to your deliberations. We developed the pay-as-you-go system and the full state construction program that was put in front of the voters and approved overwhelmingly 2 years ago. I'm also a member of the School Building Authority Board, the School Building Authority led by Christine Lopes-Metcalf, who I know is also a participant tonight, that has been vetting the Newport application. So I gather that's why I was invited, but I want to make clear, I don't believe that it is my role as a state official to tell you what I think you should do. This decision that you're going to be making is a local decision, and you as municipal officials in Newport, you know what the needs of your community are better than any of us at the state do. And so what I'm not going to do is tell you what I think you should do. What I think I can do instead to be helpful is tell you about how the state will be supportive if you decide to move forward. And second, to tell you what I've been seeing in other communities around Rhode Island, because there are a number of other cities and towns that are in a similar situation right now. They have applications that they've been working on. They're deciding whether to move forward or not. And in a number of cases, even consulting with those communities. So I can tell you a little bit about what we're seeing elsewhere in Rhode Island, which may be helpful. So first, as it relates to the state's commitment, when I met with Joe Nicholson and Laura and others a couple of months ago, they asked me a couple of questions. They asked, when are we going to know what bonuses we are going to get? Is it possible for us to know before we have to make a decision about whether to go on the ballot or not? There were also questions about whether the deadlines for the bonuses could be extended or not. So let me address each of those. And I think there's also been questions lately about if anything's going to change with the state's commitment as a result of the coronavirus crisis. So first of all, following my conversation with Joe a couple months ago, we got with RIDE, with Christine, and we worked out a process so that, yes, you will be able to get in writing an indication from RIDE of what your bonuses are likely to be. That's up to RIDE, but my understanding is that they're working on that, and the hope is to get you that indication of what your bonuses are going to be, possibly within the next week. And this is a new process. This hasn't been done before, but taking the feedback from Joe and from folks in Newport, we were able to do that. While ultimately that decision is up to the staff at RIDE, I can tell you, I mean, look, our office, we wrote the legislation that created the bonuses. And, my personal opinion is I think if the project moves forward as proposed in the stage 2 application, I personally think you're a shoo-in for the full 52.5%, 50% at the very least. This is clearly going to qualify for what's called newer and fewer, the FCI bonus. That's a very simple calculation that you clearly qualify for. This is clearly an educational enhancement bonus. Health and safety, given the condition of Rogers. I think at the Pell School, overcrowding, again, it's a very simple calculation, and there may be others as well. And so particularly if these projects are combined, Pell and Rogers, I think it's very likely that when that letter comes back from RIDE in the next week or so, you'll get an answer that you like a lot. In terms of the more recent question about, is the state going to keep these commitments given everything that's going on with the coronavirus and the state deficit and so on? Just in the last few days, I made phone calls to the people in the governor's office and the budget office who have been tasked with solving the state budget deficit. And I called a few of them individually so that I could have separate conversations and see if I got the same answer. And I can tell you, every one of them that I talked to said that they were not looking at changing the state school construction program in order to close the deficit. That's the latest that I know, and each of them told me that within the last few days, that it wasn't something that they were looking at. I'll also note that during the Great Recession in 2008, 9, 10, when the moratorium on school construction was put into place, that moratorium was not a situation where the state reneged on promises that had been made to communities. What the state did is stop approving new applications, but the applications that had been approved, the state share was still honored. And again, I don't even have any indication that anything like a moratorium is going to happen again. But I just want to point out, even in that situation where in the Great Recession there was a moratorium, the state still kept the commitments that had been made. And so again, the best information that I have from the people who are figuring out how to solve the state deficit is that school construction is not something that they're looking at. So that's all the good news. I do have one piece of not so good news. The other question that I was asked to look into was the possibility of extending the deadlines on the bonuses. Just as a reminder, in order to qualify for these bonuses, the project has to commence by certain dates. Most of the bonuses require the project to commence by the end of 2022. In some cases, it's 2023. I do not sense that there is an appetite to extend those bonus deadlines, frankly, because it would cost the state more money to do that. And in this environment, while I don't have any indication that the state is looking to cut back on its school construction commitment, I also don't sense that there's an appetite to extend it right now, given everything that's going on. So transitioning to what we're seeing from other communities, and my team and I, over the last month or two in particular, with everything that's going on, we've been in touch with probably a dozen different cities and towns that are in different stages of the RIDE application process. I would say at a high level, most of them are still moving forward. Every community obviously is dealing with budget stress and dealing with uncertainty, but most of the other communities that have stage 2 applications in have indicated that they are planning to move ahead and to go on the ballot as scheduled. So Warwick is planning to move ahead, Cranston, Burrillville, and Cumberland, which already got their voter approval but is in stage 2. One thing that I think is going to be in a later presentation, but one thing that I want to flag that some other communities are looking at, because we're in a very challenging budget situation right now at the state level, but also at the municipal level, and I realize that Newport is probably hit harder than most given how important the hospitality sector is to your economy and to your city budget. One thing that some communities are looking at is if they move forward, when they move forward, bonding structures that defer some of the cost from the early years into later years. And Laura was kind enough to share her presentation with us that she's going to give shortly. I think it's terrific, and it does a very good job of explaining how the bonding process works. And I believe at the end there's an example of how some of that deferral could work potentially. To put it in very simple terms, the most common way to do a bond is a level payment structure, like a mortgage, where whether it's a 20-year bond or a 30-year bond, the city pays the same amount every year. That's the most common way to do it, but you don't have to do it that way. You can have the payments phase in gradually over the first few years, or you can have them not come at all for the first couple of years, and to defer those principal payments to later in the life of the bond. Interest rates right now are incredibly low. Every time we think they can't go lower, they do. And so the cost of deferring principal from the early years of a bond to later years is not significant. And so a number of communities are looking at that because just like you, a number of communities have similar situations, right? They're worried about their fiscal 21 budget. They're worried about their fiscal 22 budget. So they're thinking, okay, if we're going to move forward, can we have the cost come later or ramp up gradually so that the municipal budget can adapt over time more easily? And to the extent that there's a tax increase, the taxpayers can adjust and have a few years to adapt rather than having the whole cost hit all at once, the whole increase come all at once. So I think there's a good example of that in the presentation that you're going to see shortly, but I did want to flag that there are at least a couple of other communities in Rhode Island that are looking at doing that same thing. And, given the situation that we're all in right now, I think it's not an unreasonable thing to look at. So I'll just pause there and say, again, this is a big decision. I'm not going to advocate for or against. This is one of the biggest decisions, if not the biggest decision that you as a city will have to make in a long time. And you know better than I do whether it makes sense to move forward or not. But I hope that this information is helpful, and to the extent that I'm able to answer questions, I'm happy to do so. And I just commend all of you once again for your leadership and continuing to manage through in these difficult times. You've got a great council, a great city administration, and a great school administration. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Seth, Treasurer. This is Jamie Bova, and I just wanted to say thank you for coming on this call and giving the presentation and giving us some of those reassurances from the state. Now, I do want to open it up to questions from the council and the school committee, and the first person that does have their hand up is Councilor Leonard. Councilor Leonard, you can unmute and ask the question.
All right. You talked about the state deficit in a quick fashion, and it seems that the projected deficit may now be up to 900 million, which is a huge chunk of change. And this in itself is very different than what I remember for the going way back to when the credit unions tanked. So one of the things that you said, you talked about the bonuses and what they're likely to be, and you said you felt it was a shoe-in. Well, I had talked to Angela Teixeira and Christine Metcalf, well, from RIDE, and I was told, and I have them in emails, that the bonuses are reviewed and granted when construction is finished, completed. So taking that into account, the legislature could change by the time the construction's finished. The economy could change by the time the construction is finished, either better or worse. So what would be the guarantee if the legislature changes that these bonuses would actually be granted? That's my first question.
Yes, thank you, and it's a good question. I'd say a couple of things. The only information that I have to offer is the conversations I have had with the people who are working on closing the deficit, who have told me that changes to the bonus system is not something that they're looking at. And then of course the experience from the past where, and you're right, no crisis is the same as other crises, but in the past at least, even when there was a moratorium, there was no change to the commitment that had been made. There was just a freeze on new commitments. And so, I can't predict what the legislature might do in future years. I can only tell you what I've heard. And I have not heard anyone at the state level saying that making changes like that or reneging on commitments that have been made in school construction is something that they're considering. I believe you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Thank
Yes.
you. Another thing you talked about was level payment, like mortgage payments that people make, so that basically what you said, taxpayers can adapt, you said, and increases can come later. That's your quote. So my comment is, I'm in real estate and I'm a numbers girl. I don't understand how that policy would be considered a viable, good policy. I don't know what other communities are doing, but it's like buy now and you can pay for your 7-year-old car in 7 years and start paying for it.
Yeah, I would say it's not the most common way to do a bond financing. The most common way is level payment, like most mortgages, where you pay the same amount every year. But, I also think it's reasonable to say, all right, we're in a recession right now. We have a recession that may last a couple of years for all we know. But it's not going to last 30 years and it's not going to last 20 years. If it does, we have much bigger problems. So it's not an unreasonable thing in the first few years to leg into it gradually and to make those principal payments, starting in year 3 or starting in year 4 for the rest of the life of the bond. There is some increase to the overall cost across the whole life of the bond from doing that. But again, because interest rates are so low right now, it's not significant. Now, what I would not advocate for and not suggest is any sort of a balloon payment where you push everything to the last year or something like that. I'm talking about something more minor, where you leg into it gradually the first few years, and after a few years, then you go to a level payment structure. And again, it's not the most common way to do it, but it is something that is done.
Well, one of the things that I know is that when people have a level payment, they basically pay interest only on the bonds, and then they start paying on the principal. that you're postponing what you need to do. So in a case like that, interest rates are going to change. There's no doubt in my mind that interest rates are going to change. They're not going to stay stable for 20 years. So I just want to make that comment.
Correct. Yes, and you can choose whether to have your bond be, fixed rate or floating rate, and so fixed rate would be more typical.
This is Jamie Bova. I had a question or a comment as well. The first thing I wanted to just mention was that the city finance director goes into this more in her presentation in terms of how it could be done for the city. So I think that is a good thing for us to remember. But I also wanted to bring up that I'm aware that Cranston also has a bond issue with the schools, and that is where the speaker is from, that we all know. So I think that that's something just to keep in mind when talking about whether or not, and thinking about whether or not the state will still pay for the additional incentives. And then I wanted to ask the treasurer, and this may be something that would be better addressed by RIDE, but I wanted to ask more about the reimbursements. I know that we're eligible for 52.5%, and that we are very qualified to get that full 52.5% reimbursement. So I'm hoping you can touch on the process of how those reimbursements work in terms of how they're paid and how that decision is made. That, like I said, that may be something that the treasurer can answer, or that I should hold later for a question for RIDE.
Yeah, I'll just say at a high level, again, there are several different ways to earn bonuses. It's not up to me, but in looking at your application, I think there are several that you can credibly qualify for: educational enhancements, health and safety, newer and fewer, reducing overcrowding in the case of the Pell School, et cetera. And again, these can all be bundled together. From a process point of view, the reason that RIDE doesn't make a final determination until after the project is completed is because in some communities, the project changes drastically during the course of construction, right? So if, for example, a community were to have a bonus for educational enhancements because they were building science labs as part of their project, and then halfway through they decide that they don't want to do science labs and instead they want to do a swimming pool, well, then of course they shouldn't get that educational enhancement bonus because they switched from science labs to a swimming pool, which is why RIDE doesn't make a final determination until the project is done. But at Joe's suggestion, what we have gotten RIDE to agree to do instead is to provide a letter to the city saying, if your project is in line with the way it appears in your application, then here are the bonuses you will receive. So as long as you follow the plan that is in your stage 2 application, here are the bonuses you will get. And that way you'll have at least some assurance and something in writing from RIDE at the beginning and before you go on the ballot, so that you can know what you're likely to get. And presumably you will not do something so drastic as switching out science labs for a swimming pool or something like that. So as long as you adhere closely or relatively closely to what was laid out in the application, you can be confident of what bonuses you're going to get on the back end.
Thank you. If there are more questions for the General Treasurer, or Councilor Segley? Oh, Councilor Napolitano?
Wrong name.
Okay.
Hi. Oh, I think you're on mute. Oh.
Okay,
Hi,
I've been
Jane.
unmuted. Are you saying that we wouldn't know the bonus until completion of the project?
Only because RIDE wants to make sure that you don't drastically change the project, which might affect your eligibility for the bonuses.
Mhm.
So that's why at the beginning, they will give you a letter that says, as long as you follow your plan that you submitted in your stage 2 application, here's what you'll get. But they reserve the right to change that if you change your project during the course of construction. Because again, it doesn't happen often, but occasionally a community will get halfway through a project and then decide that they want to do something very different. And so that's the only reason that RIDE does it that way. But what they will do is give you that letter at the beginning saying, as long as you don't make any drastic changes, here's what you're going to get. And you'll have that from them in writing.
And my second question was about the bonus itself and the way it's paid. I know a lot of times what we're being told is 52% upon completion of the project, but that's not the way it works. We get 2 payments a year. It's over the life of the loan.
That's
So-
right. That's right. It's basically you're putting, with your credit card, you're borrowing the money to build the school, and then the state pays 52.5%. It reimburses you for 52.5% of your credit card bill, through the life of the bond. Right. That's the way it's always worked.
Okay.
And so that 52, I should also note, I know you didn't ask this, but that 52.5% does include the interest. So it's for the total cost of the bond, not just the construction cost.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who guarantees the bonus? I mean, does RIDE or the legislature?
Yeah, it's in state law.
Okay.
Again, as soon as RIDE certifies it, it is in the law. That was passed 3 years ago.
All right, thank you.
Louisa Boatwright, school committee member Boatwright has a question or comment.
Sorry, I just wanted to, you just talking about it includes interest as well, but it also includes the furniture and technology at this point in time, because those are all bundled into the stage 2 application too. So I just wanted you to cover that too. Please.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll let RIDE address that one later because their rules are very specific, and I think there are some types of technology and fixtures that are included and some that aren't. So if you don't mind, I'll defer to RIDE on that.
Right. Again, I was just, what we have submitted in the application is what's covered, of which some furniture, only because in past bonds, they weren't covered, and that's a new policy, I believe. Thank you.
Mayor Bova, we have a question from the public.
Thank you, Carlos. There is a question from, I'm actually going to hold all public questions until the end, and we'll still answer them if they're submitted now. But just to allow the structure of the meeting to continue, I'm going to hold those to the end. You can enter a question into the Q&A, and it will still be answered, but at the end. Are there any more questions or comments from the school committee or the city council? I am seeing none, and so thank you very much, General Treasurer, for being on this call. I hope that you hang in there with us so that you can answer more questions as we go, and thank you for opening it up and presenting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all for your work.
And the next person that is going to be presenting and briefing us is the City Finance Director, Laura Citrin. Laura, I think you're still on mute. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. All right. This is actually going on the base. There's a PowerPoint presentation that I believe is going to be put up onto the screen so that people can follow along with the presentation. So obviously, when Mr. Shevlin can get that up, we'd start right with the cover page. Before we get into the presentation, I just want to say right off the top that this presentation actually was originally requested by a school committee member so that they could talk to voters about what the impact of the school bonds would be. We wouldn't necessarily prepare something like this until the construction costs were final and the cash flows were close to final. But in this case, we went ahead and did it. So this presentation was done back in the beginning of March. It does not match what's in the revised numbers from the stage 2 preliminary approval. In order to finalize our financing plan, we would need the approved school committee final project amounts and then cash flow for the project closer to the time when it's actually going to be done. The RIDE approval numbers were just shy of 106.5 million for both the Pell addition and the Rogers High School replacement. This presentation is based on, I believe it's 114.5, but the bottom line is that the process is still the same. You know, certainly the numbers will reduce a little bit, but I think that the general point of the presentation is still going to be pretty clear. So if you want to move on to page, sorry, 4. Page 4, please. All right, this simply is that there were some questions as to what kind of professionals are involved in the debt issuance process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular page, but the presentation is on the website, and if there are questions and people want to talk more about what the role of different players are in the debt issuance process, this information is available on the website, and of course, I'm always available if you want to contact me by email or phone. I'm going to go to the next page because these are the professionals that would be involved specifically in the city's bonding. So if you want to move to page 5, that would be great. All right, so obviously the issuer is the city of Newport. Our financial advisor is Hilltop Securities. We work with Adam Cray, who is available to answer questions, although he is on by phone, so we would have to identify that phone number if somebody has a question specifically for him. Our bond counsel is Karen Grandy at Lock Lord. Our, in the case of underwriters and a paying agent, we have to issue school bonds through Rhode Island Housing Education Corp. And because we do that, they actually go out and negotiate and sell the bonds. So the city and our advisors would not necessarily do that piece of it, although we're involved in the process, certainly, and we're involved in structuring it so that it's set up to in the city's best interest, really. We use the credit rating agency of S&P. So there would be a credit review involved, of course, as there is with any type of bonding. Right now, the city's credit rating is a AA+. We hope that we will not have to draw down significant reserves during the course of this pandemic, so that we don't have issues with our ratings. I'm going to skip over page 6 and move to page 7. Please. Okay, and this is what I had sort of just talked about, issuing the bonds through Rhode Island Health and Educational Building Corp, or RIDEC as they're known. So we're going to issue general obligation bonds, and what that means is that the bonds are backed by the full faith and credit of the government. That's what guarantees the payment, the debt service. It's not like a revenue bond where, like what we do with our utilities, our water and sewer, where they're actually backed by revenues that are going to be generated. These are backed by the full faith and credit and assumes that the government will appropriate the annual funding required to pay the debt service. We have to apply to RIBEC 3 months prior to the time we wish to issue the bond and receive proceeds for spending, and there's a process. RIBEC's municipal advisor helps with the process. The city's municipal advisor is part of the process, and the bond counsel, our bond counsel, will ensure that things are structured legally and in the best interest of the city. On the next page, page 8, so the state pay-go and housing aid. RIDE actually did something really helpful, and they put a pay-go calculator up on their website. So while the numbers in this were originally set up to reflect the 114.5, I did go on today and recalculate what the pay-go amount would be. And this is part of the $250 million bond that was approved. So that normally RIDE would not give us an amount up front. They would normally pay all of the housing aid over the life of the loan. In this case, they are willing to pay a percentage up front, and they do the pay-go calculation assuming our guaranteed reimbursement rate, which is 35%. So the city's pay-go amount on the total of the revised bond amount of 106.5 essentially would be $7,927,000 and change. So rather than the 8.5 that's used in this calculation or used in this presentation, just for your interest, the pay-go would be about 7.9 million. So we can seek that pay-go, which is 35 cents for every 65 cents it spends on the project up to that dollar amount. And they'll pay that up front. So as the bills come in, they'll pay 35% and we'll pay 65%. That's how that works, if I'm correct. All right, the total project cost, less the pay-go, results in what we would issue in bonds, which on the revised numbers, assuming that those stay the same and that's what the project actually ends up being approved for, would be $98.4 million. So as the treasurer has already talked about, we may be eligible for up to 52.5% reimbursement on principal and interest payments if we meet all of the, after the project's complete, and RIDE determines whether or not we're eligible for all of those incentives. Okay, on the next page, page 9, just briefly the process. So the city passes a resolution requesting that Enabling Act get passed by the General Assembly. And as you know, that's on the next docket. That allows us to then go to the voters for approval for authorization to borrow the money. If the voters approve it, then the city council would authorize the mayor and the finance director to work together to issue the debt. Debt can be issued for any public purpose, and as I had stated earlier, it's secured by the full faith and credit and taxing power of the government. Obviously, the higher the credit rating, the better the interest rate. You know, it's difficult to put numbers together this far ahead of time because we really don't know what the rates are going to be in the municipal market in 21 fiscal calendar year 21 and calendar year 22. But we're always conservative in our estimates. So in this particular case, as we get further along, you'll see that we have some estimated amounts based on bonding over and bands and bond anticipation notes and then bonds over the life of the project. And I believe we're using interest rates of 4 and 5% on the bonds, which may seem high in today's market, but again, we don't want to err on the wrong side here when we're projecting several years out. So those are the rates that were recommended by the financial advisors, and that's how the debt service was calculated for the purposes of this presentation. I briefly just mentioned bond anticipation notes. They're just part of the bond legislation. They allow us to go out and borrow money on a short-term basis that will then be repaid with actual bond proceeds when we issue the bonds. If we go to the next page, we can skip over page 10. Actually, I believe, yes. If we go to page 11, that just talks about the 4 primary rating agencies. And again, these slides, the next 2 slides are pretty self-explanatory. If anyone has any questions, you can email me at lcitron@cityofnewport.com or call me, and I'll be happy to answer questions. But this page and page 12, if you want to move on, just shows what the typical ratings are, what's available, and whether or not they're speculative grade or better than speculative grade, which fortunately we are. If we move now, I'm going to skip through. There's a lot on the presentation that's information that's actually very valuable, but doesn't necessarily need to be discussed tonight as part of this workshop. So I'm going to skip right to page 22 because I think that's the stuff that people are most interested in. That has to do with the timing and structure of the city's financing related to school projects. And when we initially talked about borrowing money, and there were obviously all different kinds of numbers floating around in terms from everything from 180 million down to 120 million. When we were looking at the possible financial impact, we were looking at it from a holistic view. So we were saying, okay, if we had to go out and borrow $150 million, let's say, this is what the impact is going to be on the taxpayers. And it assumed it all in 1 year because we had no way of knowing how long it was going to take to construct the projects, when we would need the money. So what we did was, in this particular presentation, we used the cash flow that we had received from the school committee, or well, from the school vendors that helped them with the project back in January, actually before stage 2 was issued, but it was useful enough for purposes of trying to come up with how we would actually structure a bond. And there's something called arbitrage, and I know it's one of those words that's used that kind of makes people cringe. But the simplest explanation at this point in time for that is that you have to spend the bond proceeds within 24 months. Otherwise, you risk, let me rephrase that. It says very clearly here, the IRS doesn't want municipalities to invest bond proceeds and earn interest on tax-exempt bonds. So generally the rule is spend the proceeds within 24 months. If the project is going to be longer than 24 months, which this project is expected to be longer than 24 months, we would not want to issue the bonds all at once. We would want to do it in a series of bond issues, just because we don't want to get into an arbitrage situation where we have to do calculations and repay money to the IRS potentially, or risk making the bonds taxable. So the timing and the structure of the financing is based on the projected cash flow, as I said. So if we need $10 million the first month that we start the project, and this is strictly an example, this is not what we actually said, but if we need that $10 million, then we know in that first month we've got to have $10 million in bond proceeds, right? So as we project out how we're going to need the cash over the course of the project, that's how we determine how to structure the bond. So the projects, at least based on the cash flow that I was using, are anticipated to begin in December 2020. Pell Edition is scheduled to be done in April 23 and the high school in November of 24. Those were the assumptions based on the cash flow that were used to generate the information for this presentation. If you go to the next page, please, thank you. The financing plan assumes the pay-go. So in this case, it'd be 7.9 million in state bonds and requires a match of 65%. For purposes of this presentation, we assumed 45% housing aid reimbursement for bonds because we needed to be conservative in our assumptions. And we have nothing in writing that says that we're going to get more than actually the 35%, although I think, you know, based on everything that everybody's saying, hopefully it will be the 52.5. But for purposes of this, we used 45%. And I talked about the interest rates earlier. So how we would do this, we would issue bands, bond anticipation notes, for project costs from January 2021 through December 2022. And we would use the band. So the way that that would work is that the state pay portion, the 7.9 million, and the city's bands would work together to make up the 35 and 65% of the financing for however long it takes to run through that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I would guess it's at least 8 months, maybe longer. At that point, that's actually going to run through December 2022. This assumes that in December 2022, we're going to issue 51 million in bonds, retire all of the bond anticipation notes, and pay for project costs for the next 12 months or through December 2023. At that point, we would issue the second round of bonds to cover costs for the completion of the project. If you go to the next page, what that does is it allows in fiscal year 21, there would be no impact on the tax rate because the interest rate on bands is so low and the amount that we're issuing that it's not really something that we would have to necessarily increase our taxes for. That's actually also true for fiscal year 2022. What increase there would be due to interest charges on the bands is going to be minimal. I think the band interest rate is estimated at 1.9% maybe. So where you start to see the impact on the tax rate is in fiscal year 2023. And that first set of bonds that I talked about issuing, we would see a tax increase of around 1.23% based on that. In fiscal year 24, the tax rate increase based on these numbers, which, you know, this is now probably could be considered worst case scenario. The tax rate increase would be around 3.47% in fiscal year 24. The impact on an owner of a house worth $400,000 over the 2 years where there would be tax rate increases is about $200 a year once both tax rate increases went into effect. And that's the extent of the online presentation. So at this point, it's really whatever questions people might have.
Thank you, Laura. So if you have questions, you can raise your hand. And I know that school committee member Neary has a question, so you can unmute yourself and ask.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was illuminating. I just want to confirm, I know you said it at the beginning, but I want to confirm that this presentation is based on numbers. It's from March 2020, correct? So it's a couple months old at this point.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct? Okay, great. And then, so that makes it a little difficult based on what we heard from the treasurer to really do an apples to apples comparison, because we're looking at your presentation is not using his numbers, but that's okay. I mean, that's fine. It was well laid out at the bonding. Another question on the rate. So we are rated AA++, correct? The city of Newport. Or just AA. AA plus, single plus. Okay, great. Thank you. I mean, you don't have a crystal ball. I get that. But what do you think the likelihood is that we'll go from where we are now, which is between 0.5 and 1%, to 4% in the next 24 months? I mean, we're not even there really on the residential side. So it's good to be conservative, but I'm trying to, with your expertise, where do you think we'll realistically be falling? Because we're really low now. Like we are the low that we've never seen. I mean, I've never seen anything this low.
I don't know what the rates are right now for issuing essentially $100 million in bonds. But we do have our financial advisor on. He may be able to help more with that.
That'd be great actually. Just to give us a sense. Again, because I'm trying to get to today's numbers, or as much as today's numbers as we can, as opposed to looking at something that was a couple months old. We hadn't been approved by RIDE for stage 2, so the full amount is even lower. It's hard for me to look at that presentation and really really have a clear picture of what we're trying to get for our kids in terms of like the opportunity we're trying to get them. But obviously we do have to be fiscally conservative and responsible, but I want to make sure we're getting the best deal for the children. And I know you said that. I mean, I know you said that part of the role is to make sure that we get the absolute best deal for the city and really for the city's kids. So if the gentleman from our firm could maybe talk about what, again, no crystal ball, but where do we think the rates are actually going to be? That would be helpful, because even 2 months ago, they weren't as low as they are now. So we're starting from a lower bottom. So I'd just like to know.
If we could have our city's financial advisor press *9 on his phone so we can identify your phone number.
Did he do that?
Yes, good evening. This is Adam Cray at Hilltop Securities. Can
Great.
everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me this evening. So you're definitely correct in that we do not have a crystal ball. I can tell you that we're working on a transaction today for a community that is rated very similar to Newport. And it's a 20-year transaction. And the rate we're projecting right now is actually less than 2.5%. That's on a 20-year transaction. This transaction right now, we're looking at potentially up to a 30-year bond. So the rate would be a little higher because the bonds would go out longer. But I would say that if we were doing this right now, the rate would be still probably just shy of 3%. Now, granted, as Finance Director Citrin said, the first bond issue is planned for, on this current plan, based on a first bond issue date of December 2022, which of course is a ways away. And that's why we used 4% for that December 2022 projection rather than the current 3%. But as you correctly said, we were being a little bit conservative just to make sure we didn't, the last thing we want to do is to project a cost and have it come in over and perhaps have you be surprised at a later date.
Right. So, so ultimately, whatever number we're using, it sounds to me that this is good for the taxpayers of Newport, and it's really good for our kids, right? Because it'll allow us to get them educational opportunities that they currently don't have, like creating a learning environment for our kids that they currently don't have. And this is a good deal. This is good for our kids ultimately. It's not, we're not in the 1980s. We're not looking at we're not looking at much higher rates. So right. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the children of Newport. And it sounds to me that with this, we will be able to give them a learning environment that they haven't had. And considering the physical nature status of certainly of our high school, that is something that as a community is a good thing to do. Thank you.
Councilor Napolitano has a question, and I would just say for everyone on the call, if you have a question, because I see some folks raising their hand, if you could just use the raise hand button on the participants column, that would just make it a lot easier to keep track of everyone. Thank you. And Councilor Napolitano, you have the floor. You're still muted. You're still muted.
This is Kate Leonard, and my name comes up as Jean Napolitano.
Oh.
So you unmuted me. So
That's what you were trying to say, Jean. Sorry.
Okay, so I understand what Adam Craig's saying. And yes, we're making a projection, which is really a guesstimate, because I can remember in 1986, 87, where the interest rate on mortgages actually went up to almost 14%. So I'm not saying it would be, I'm just pointing it out that these are guesstimates and there's nothing set in stone. By the time December 2022 comes on or later, we really don't have an exact number or interest rate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilor Member Bolin, just remember, or Committee Member Bolin, and remember to unmute.
Okay. So I have a question. Maybe it's silly, but why would we do I think you said like 1 3/4 the first year and 3 3/4. Why wouldn't you like kind of average those out so it wouldn't be such a hit to the community? Is there a reason for that? Why we don't? Because I know 3 3/4 is very hard to absorb in a given year, maybe.
I think it has more to do with timing, so that the cash flow was done in a calendar year. So you really, it's really the way that it's hitting the fiscal years versus the calendar year.
Okay.
All right.
Councilor McCalla.
This is Councilor McCalla. I actually just had a thought. I don't know if others have read the article in which East Providence actually increased. I think that their bond rating, their credit rating actually increased, despite the fact that they had, I think, $170 million school project as well. So I just wanted to share that thought.
Are there any other questions or comments by school committee members or council members? I actually had a question for the finance director as well. And can you just go, I just want to go back to the question of how the bonds are issued in segments. And I forget what slide that was on. And I was hoping you could walk through, and just for my own information, I want to make sure I understand that if you issue the bond in 2 segments, even though you issue the bond anticipation notes earlier than when you issue both bonds, for the second bond, you're not incurring interest until you actually issue it, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, one of the Lyns had their hand up first, and then the other one, I don't know which of you had it first.
Me.
Okay. So go ahead, Councilor Underwood Segley Napolitano.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I don't know, is it possible for us to have 2 separate questions on the bonds, one for Pell and one for Rogers? And I'm not sure who I should ask that question to. If I understand the current, what we have in front of us is for both of them together. So I'm asking the question.
Anything is possible. It has to be structured legally so that whatever goes on the ballot is what everybody is expecting. So when you look at the bond resolution for next, that's on the next docket, it will be for the 2 projects combined. Something different will have to be passed if you were to go a different way with how you want this. So if you were going to put 2 or 5 questions onto the ballot, there would have to be enabling acts for all of those questions.
Okay.
My understanding.
Thank you.
Councilor Segley.
Yes, this is Lynn Segley. I think this is a question for Treasurer Magaziner. Is he still with us?
I am here. I had to jump off, but now I'm back on.
Okay, thanks. I'm curious about another opportunity we might have if we do not go forward with this, putting this on the ballot. I mean, what kind of opportunity would we have in the future if we did not?
Yeah. So I'd say a couple of things. And can everyone still hear me? Yes? Okay, good. So as a city, you can submit a school construction application to RIDE at any time. You know, if you decided to pull out this year, you could submit another. You would have to go through the application process at RIDE again, which you could do next year or the year after the year after. But what you would be giving up is the bonuses, right? Because the bonuses have expiration dates that are written into state law. So again, most of the bonuses expire. They require you to begin the project, to break ground on the project in 2022. A couple of them are 2023. But if you were willing to forego the bonuses, you could revisit this anytime, and then you would be back at the normal 35% rate.
Okay, thank you.
I did, when I logged back in a few minutes ago, I did hear one, I think it was 2 questions ago that if I could real quick comment on. I think there was a question about in Laura's presentation, that tax increase over the 2 years, if it could be smoothed out or something like that. And I think she explained why it wasn't in this version, but that is actually the kind of thing I was talking about earlier in my presentation when I was talking about having a deferred principal model where instead of the same dollar amount each of your 30 years, you can leg into it gradually over a few years. That is the kind of thing that can be done. And that's the sort of thing Adam from Hilltop was on the, responded to an earlier question. That's the kind of thing that he and his colleagues would work with you to develop if you wanted to do some sort of a custom structure like that.
This is Jamie Bova. I just wanted to make the comment that if we do split the bonds, we lose some of the incentives because some of those incentives come from having both projects in the same bond. And so that would have the potential of leaving a lot of money on the table, leaving millions on the table. And we would have to have I would want to have another presentation from the finance director so that we are able to see what the implications financially would be if we were to split the bond. And I wanted to ask, since we do have you on the call still, the general treasurer, or actually this is probably a question for one of the members of RIDE that we have on the call, if they could touch on the potential impact on the bonuses.
Hi. When it comes to the bonds,
yes.
So it really is for us, it's when the project is complete and how the district submits that to us for reimbursement. So if there was a desire to split the bond and pay them at different times, depending if you were to stagger it, reduce it, then that would impact the bonuses.
And the question was, I think, specifically to have it as 2 different ballot questions.
In 2 different years?
I think in the same year.
The same year. So for us, the decision about how you structure the bond on the ballot is a local decision. So what impacts what bonuses you would be eligible for is when you submit it to us and whether or not everything is submitted at the same time as a package versus in different years.
Yeah. If I could add to that, I think what I would say is where you could potentially run into issues is if one question was passed and the other one failed, right? I don't know, I mean, because RIDE is still doing their review, but it's possible, for example, that Rogers alone might qualify for a number of bonuses, 50% or 52.5%, because it's such a big project with so many different facets to it. But Pell alone might not qualify for that much. So if Rogers were to fail and Pell were to succeed, Pell wouldn't necessarily get as much of a bonus on its own as the 2 projects would together. That being said, if they were separate bond questions and they were both passed, then they could be combined and they would be eligible for the full amount. I don't know, Christine, does that sound?
Nope, that's correct. Yep.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you. And the next person that has their hand up is Committee Member Flowers. And remember to unmute yourself.
Okay. If, for example, we said, okay, let's just defer doing this and it's beyond the bonus time, anyone who owns property knows that if you put off your work, the price is going to go up of everything, the labor, the materials, everything. And the price goes up, the bond will have to go up, and the interest rate will be paying more. Even if it's the same interest rate, you're going to be paying more. So it seems for me, the fiscally responsible thing to do is keep going along with the schedule we have now. It would seem, and I had a question in my mind too about the merits of having the 2 separate bonds. I think it simplifies, we'll probably be talking about that in a separate stage of our discussion, but I think simplifying matters for the voters and for us in terms of putting the message out of the need for these things if you keep it together, then you can, it'll make it easier probably, and for the accounting and looking at things from Ryan's point of view, to look at the full package. And as you say, the bonuses will add up nicely that way. But to defer something is going to add the price. We know that ourselves.
And Councillor Leonard?
Say that from the constituents I hear from, and I get, I would say, more calls than almost anybody. The constituents want to see a split bond issue on the ballot. The problem with it is if we don't, in my opinion, that I think there's a very good movement to pass the bond and make the construction for Pell School. But I have to say, I haven't heard much at all about going ahead with the Rogers High School construction, because many people are still hoping that the island schools will look to work together for either regionalization or tuitioning in students. I'm just giving that as a given because I hear it every day, whether it's in the market, the drugstore, or anywhere else. So I would not like to see Pell construction lose out, because if they're combined, I think there's a great chance that that would happen and the bond as one would be defeated.
Louisa Boatwright, you have to unmute.
Hi. I just want to make sure we have time to go through our presentation, Jamie, because it does address some of these things. And I just did want to hit that question of Jean's that we have submitted in the application to, it would be up to 10% on Pell if it was a loan, and on Rogers, it is 20% that we've put in. We're limited to the 17.5. So individually, that's what they would get potentially, and we're trying to get that letter from RIDE on both individually, but collectively, they would both get the 17.5 for sure, by what you have heard, because together they're over the 20%. So
I'm gonna give the mic to Ida Neary, and then we can go to the presentation from the superintendent.
Great, thank you. I'm trying to, well, I want to piggyback on what Dr. Flowers said in terms of cost. The longer we go and the more expensive it is. But fundamentally, I'm trying to understand the logic of telling our children that you deserve an elementary school, but you don't deserve a high school, or telling parents who can have children in all three schools, your K-4 students deserve a better building, but your high schoolers don't. So I am trying to understand the logic, certainly as city leaders, in us sending that message out to our parents that some of your children deserve something, but the others don't. And to Councillor Leonard's point, I understand what she means, that maybe there's this mythical option in the future, but we've been looking for partners from what I understand, for about 11 years. There was a report that came out in 2009 about the possibility of regionalization, and we're still here. We're still here, and our children have been held hostage to this mythical thing that can happen. So again, I'm trying to understand the logic of our message as city leaders, and especially as city leaders, to tell parents and voters, some kids deserve this, but the others don't. And they're all of our children, whether they're in kindergarten or they're in 9th grade. And I would say, let's not forget that Rogers High School is not getting any younger, just fundamentally that is not changing. Nothing has changed. It's not getting any younger. It won't be any younger next year and the year after. And we will continue to sink money into a building that we have been told is the worst high school facility in the state. So again, I would like to understand the logic of telling our children, telling the parents in our community, these children are worth it and these other children who are older are not.
I know that there's some back and forth that people want to have there. I do want to get to the superintendent's presentation, so we're going to go to her, and then there will obviously be time for more discussion by council and school committees. I do want to make the point that we all get a lot of different emails, and I have not gotten a single email from anyone that wants to split the bond. All the emails I've gotten have been wanting to pass both. So citing that we don't know how that, it's not always helpful. But I do want to turn to the superintendent, and I believe that you have the presentation that you want to go through.
Thank you, Mayor Bova. Thank you, City Council, school committee members, and for those that are tuning in tonight. Yes, Mr. Shevlin does have the presentation. If you could put it up on the screen, that would be great. And I would just like to echo Ms. Neary's, committee members Neary's statements. I am very confused as well about what's going on in Newport, in a community that I grew up in, that I attended Rogers High School, and that I know if I were in that school today, my parents would never stand for the facility and its conditions it is now. They would be at every meeting advocating for a new building. And before I go further, I'll just state that, again, with Ms. Committee Member Neary's comments, we have been trying for years. And all the way back when I was in Portsmouth, I was on that committee. And as a matter of fact, it was Sue Lucy and I that put forward to RIPEC a grant to try to unify the entire island. And that was back in 2004. And today it's 2020. And after our reception at Middletown, I don't know why most of our families would want to unify at this point in time. And I will also say that they still have 23% they still have to get after their third extension for signatures, and it hasn't happened. So I just want to point that out. So good evening, and here's tonight's presentation. And I'm excited about it because this is what Rogers High School could be. This is what we could have for not only our children, but also for the community, as far as job training and as far as a facility that could be used by both our young people and our adults that need to retrain, that want to retrain. So Tom, if you could go to the next slide, please. We're looking for a quality education for a world-class city, and that's who we are here in Newport. So the next slide starts, and Tom, slide 2, please.
Give me 1 second.
No problem. So what you're about to see is you're going to start to see the drawings and the renderings of what is possible and what we can have and should have for our students, I hope.
I actually have it. I downloaded it from an email from earlier today, so I think I could share my screen if Tom is not able to. But he got there. All right.
There you go. Thank you, Tom. All right. So what you're looking at right now is the potential, the drawings, the renderings of what our new gym facility could look like, and what I know we all love dearly, that auditorium, but this is what would be our new theater and auditorium going forward. You can see that through this new facility, how we can maintain Newport's competitive edge, first with our student mindset, creating a place where our students want to be, motivation and self-belief about who we are. We can continue to offer a very diverse student body what every child deserves. And we also have the opportunity in this state-of-the-art CTE program, an integrated facility that allows our children to explore multiple pathways and not only are college ready, but they're ready to go out to the world to meet employer needs and parallel what our employers are asking for, working closely with our community people and in internships. And as I just recently shared with some people, some of our internships, one of our students just got a contract with Toyota out here in Middletown. He's going to start a full-time position starting next week, and we're getting more and more of our interns. Last year, we had students sign right on with, what's the name, family name? It's Jerry Kirby and his firm. They went right to construction management right out of the box. So we have a facility right now in front of you that can be state of the art. And you'll notice that sign, that tagline, One Newport at the end. It's all about the entire community. It's not just about our students, which our students do deserve, but it's also about the entire community. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, this is what our students and staff go to every day. What you see in front of you is just a small sampling, and I know a lot of you have already been on the tours of what is already in our facility as far as the deterioration, the deferred maintenance, the cracks up there. The picture to the left is of our auditorium. And frankly, with the structural report we have, we're going to be investing money to have monthly inspections because for some, it may not even be safe pretty soon. It's a safety factor. We also, you'll notice that's actually literally in the bottom corner. That's a picture of a stair that's coming out of one of our emergency fire doors when the students have to go on, when they have their fire drills, etc. But that in itself is showing you the deterioration, what's going on, and the improvements we need in our building that, as Dr. Flowers very clearly pointed out, is just going to become more expensive as time goes on. In the time we've been out in distance learning, we've already had some pipe breaks in Rogers High School. So we've had to apply emergency repairs and have the heating system and water systems addressed while we've been out in distance learning. $72 million for repairs alone at that one facility. The structural issues, the safety concerns, everything. When you read the report, and I know I'm getting on my soapbox here, but when we're the #1 facility in the state that is rated worst conditions, I don't know how we can't do something and take advantage of this opportunity we have in front of us. I know the timing's not great, but we're not going to have this kind in the future. If you go on to the next slide, thanks, Tom, you're good. Going on to the next slide. The new Rogers High School will give us a warm, safe, and dry state-of-the-art facility. I don't need to read this to you, but just imagine what we could be like. Be a high school where families want their children to attend, where we bring back, often I hear at the meetings, the importance of keeping the middle class in our community and wanting our students to be successful. Well, I think this right here shows you what is possible right in front of us. And even with everything I've been talking about, even those upstate at RIDE, take a look at our application, and it was commended by the creative application we did as far as integrating CTE programming. So not only do our children have the opportunity to graduate and walk the stage with some kind of certification, they also have the possibility of earning an associate's degree, taking AP courses. This school will allow our children to do it all. And at half the price with the incentives that are coming forward. The next slide goes on to Pell. Pell, we don't have to say any more about Pell because all of us know, and some of us knew from the moment the doors opened, that it's overcrowded. We don't have enough room. We need the addition. We have people in places that weren't not meant for classrooms or offices, and we need to do more for our families and especially our young learners. And this opportunity will enable us not only to put the needed classroom space that's there, but the desperately needed family and ELL welcome center for our families. So when they get that first impression of the Newport Public Schools, they know they're entering a school system that cares about their children and cares about our families. We're a very diverse community. And we have to start practicing that. And we are practicing that now from the very beginning when our children come into our buildings. We have interpreters at every single building. And we have teachers that are taking the extra steps to make sure our children feel welcome. But you'll notice even at Pell, we do have some stormwater deficiencies. We do have safety issues, concerns. All of us know. I remember my very first year here. I was at that building every morning and every afternoon helping with traffic because there are so many children in that one facility that we have to do something to make it safer as far as the vehicle routes and as far as the parking. And that's another concern at Pell. Pell, I don't think I have to do a lot of speaking to. But the school construction, Tom, thank you. I believe this is what it's all about. This is all about community. And if you go down Broadway today and look at those banners, I have had so many emails from so many other districts just about those banners, about, oh my gosh, what a great community. You guys are going all out. Look at what you're doing for your kids. What a great idea. That if we didn't have those banners and we weren't doing those things right now, we wouldn't be a community. It's not, we want families in Newport. We want jobs in Newport. This project right here will get us the facility we need for Pell. It will also give us a high school that is safe, warm, dry, is ready to meet the needs of our students and help retool our community members, and will help us bring back the spirit and pride that at least I grew up with in Newport. This is what Rogers High School is all about. This is what Newport's all about. This is why we have such a great, vibrant, diverse community. But to Council Committee Member Neary's comments and the other comments I've heard tonight, why wouldn't we do this for all children? Why is it we have to pick and choose? And when we have an opportunity like this for a reimbursement at 52.5% for our children to create a state-of-the-art facility, I have to admit, every day I say to myself, I can't believe it ever got to this condition. And I can't believe we wouldn't do anything to change that tomorrow. So the next one is on the money. Thank you, Tom, again. And Laura did a great presentation. Thank you, Laura. I think you really helped us to better understand and to understand the process. And as we all know, these are the most recent numbers. And these are the numbers that RIDE approved. And hopefully within the next week or two, we'll have a letter once the application has been given the final approval, which we don't foresee any problems there. But this right here kind of tells you all what it is and what the reimbursement is. $55.6 million to reimburse Newport. Newport doesn't take that, some other town gets that. And then also, I think it is an important point that someone already mentioned this evening, that currently along with Newport, we have Cranston, the Speaker of the House community that is in this round. We also have Warwick, one of the largest communities in the state. We have Cumberland, and if I'm not mistaken, that's where our Lieutenant Governor McKee is from. And then we have Boroughful. So we didn't pick this, but we wound up being with a pretty powerful, I'll call it, represented group up at the State House. And I would find it very hard to believe that anyone would ever pull back on any of these incentives. So that's why it is important. We've got the money. I know the times are not good, but interest rates are low. Cost of money is low. No one can ever predict the future. I agree with that. Who would have thunk we'd be sitting here today, all in a meeting, looking at each other on screens, talking about this? But I have to say, we also have to be brave and we have to be courageous as far as being leaders, and we have to do what's right for our community and our children. And that's why I'm here and I'm sitting here in this chair. So the enhancements and the bonuses were mentioned before as to why. Safety, it's the worst facility in the state. We'll have newer and fewer because of what we're doing with Rogers in this NACTAC building. We're getting a higher rate of support. I think it's 500 plus per square foot versus a Pell, which is only getting 400 something per square foot. But because of that creativity and what we're trying to do here in Newport, we get a higher rate. We will relieve the overcrowding at Pell, and we'll get the additional learning enhancements at Pell as well. So we've done our due diligence. We've been at this for 2.5 years, and now is the time. Now's the time we have to start to move forward and make it a reality. So I'm going to start to get off my soapbox here and say this final, and I sincerely mean this. On behalf of the Newport educational family, our teachers who are working day and night, hard as can be, we respectfully ask for your support for our students, our staff, and most importantly of all, our families and our community. And we already know with Pell, if you build it, they will come. So that is the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Germain. I just want to say really briefly, again, we're going to have some comments and questions from the council and the school committee, but we are also going to have public comment as well, and I want to make sure we have time for that. So I just want to put that out there for everyone. Councillor Leonard.
Oh, I forgot to take my hand down.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a comment. I just listened.
Councillor Segley.
Yes. I just have a question about the impact of the school, the building on the local economy, just from a construction standpoint. Could someone comment on that?
I'll answer and share what I meant by that comment. What I meant by that comment, if we're going to have construction going on at both Pell and Rogers, that's going to mean workers. That's going to mean people being employed. That's going to mean people visiting our restaurants. That's going to mean meal trucks. That's going to possibly mean people staying in our hotels. That is my very layman's answer to that. So I don't know if someone has a more clinical, answer to that, but that's mine.
Councillor Leonard, is your hand up for real this time?
Unmute.
Kate, you're on mute.
Okay, thanks. I just have a question because we never got an answer before. and I think the public would like to know, because I hear it a lot, if the bond goes on the ballot, whether it's one bond or two, and if the bonds don't pass or just Rogers doesn't pass, what's plan B?
I mean, I don't know if that's a question for Superintendent Germain, but I will say we shouldn't, if we're going to look at splitting the bonds, we need a new financial projection from the city finance manager before we do that. Ms. Boatwright?
Yes, I think to Kate's comment, we put out an RFP and one district, Middletown, responded and they're unable to take all of our students. So what it would mean is if, you know, we'll be at Rogers, and you've seen some pictures of Rogers, and we'll stay there until, you know, you can't use that building anymore, which is what we're trying to articulate, that it has great need today. What I wanted to, and yeah, that's the answer to that question. But I wanted to also say to Lynn Segley's comment, she was asking about how we can use the building in this economy post-COVID. I'm also on the Working Cities group in Newport, and we have been talking about also having the career tech and Rogers being used as a community asset for training and retraining. And we don't know what the economy is going to necessarily look like into the future. Everything is up in the air. We're hoping that it will just come back quickly, but we will be starting now to start some programs as needed to train people to get back to work, because we have done that already with Working Cities, with a culinary program where 22 kids or students, actually age 18 to 25, were in the program, and all 22 were employed and were still employed a year later. So things like that, we will be doing that starting now, but with a new school and a new facility, it would be a real community asset in these times. So.
Counselor Napolitano.
Whoops, am I muted?
You're good.
Okay. Just want to say, after 24 years of being on the council and approving Thompson and Pell, Thompson 3 times we had to go at it. You're not getting the calls we're getting in terms of people telling me that they lost their job. They can't pay their mortgage. They can't pay their rent. This is really uncertain times. We don't even know what's going to happen in the city. At least 50% of what goes on in the city is due to hospitality spending, and we don't have any of that. So I guess I really am concerned in trying to put it into balance, but I guess it bothers me when you say you don't care about all our kids. That's all I've done the whole time I've been in Newport. And that characterization is totally unfair.
Counselor Leonard, if you don't have anything new to say, though, I do want to make sure that we give everyone time to comment. You've had a few times to comment so far.
I have something new.
Okay.
I'd like to know why Newport City Council has not met with the other island councils even after we passed a resolution asking to do so.
I'm going to take that question because I assume that question is for me. And we've been through this many times. No meeting was able to be set up. Counselor Leonard, please let me speak. Thank you. We tried to set up meetings multiple times with Portsmouth and did not was not able to get a response at any time to meet with them. That continues to be what happened, and you can ask the question as many times as possible, and that will continue to be the answer. Ms. Gary has the floor.
I just wanted to respond to Councilwoman Leonard about the other districts and what are we doing for Plan B. So as Mrs. Bortwright mentioned, we put an RFP out, only Middletown responded, and they don't have room for all of our students. So that's one. And I also want to, I think sometimes we forget that tuitioning out is not the panacea that we think it is. We still have to pay for busing. We still have to bus our children somewhere else. You know, we still have to pay for the students somewhere else. Those communities are not taking our children out of charity. They're making money from taking our children. So it isn't this magical, wonderful thing that doesn't cost us anything. It does cost us something. And one of the things it costs us, I think, is the pride of Newport, is the pride in our community, the pride that we have in providing, in our own community, providing excellent educational opportunities in our community. But mostly I wanted to bring up the financial point, that there is a financial cost to sending our students somewhere else. And I also think, and this now is just a statement, it's no longer an answer, a question. It's simply, it is on us as leadership. Leadership asks us to do things that are difficult in difficult times. If it were easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I appreciate the conversation we're having, but we sometimes have to make difficult choices because of the community in which we live, because we want to serve that community. And to Councilwoman Napolitano, you're right, people are suffering, and I don't have the math on that, and I would love to see the math from the finance director, but my understanding is that around 70% of our general fund comes from property taxes. So, I mean, unless everybody is going into foreclosure, the hotels, everybody, we are still getting some revenue. Are we getting enough? No, certainly. But we are still getting some revenue. And those families that we mentioned, those families still have to send their children to a school that is functioning, that is not falling apart. So I know I sound like a broken record, but I am a broken record. My constituents are the children of Newport, and they deserve an elementary school that is not overcrowded, and they deserve not to be in the worst building in this educational building in the state. Thank you.
There are 3 folks that have their hands up. I want to wrap up the council and school committee discussion in the next 10 minutes so that we can give time for public comment. Ms. Bolin has her hand up, and if you could go ahead.
Okay, I just want to make an analogy really quickly. So, I heard the comments about, the poor timing of this, but if you lived in your home and there was a tornado and part of your roof blew off, you still got to fix your roof. You don't have a choice. You got to find the money. You got to do it, because it's only going to, if you don't address it, a year down the road, you're not going to have any furniture left or anything left inside that house. So, think of this as our school has failed, just like the roof has failed. Truthfully, the time now is better than it will be years from now, because it's not going to get to be a better situation. So I just want you to keep that in mind.
Thank you. And Sandra Flowers had her hand up as well.
Just briefly responding to Councilor Leonard's what if, we just don't bother with the Rogers site, but concentrate on the Pell site. And referring back to the superintendent's description of what happened while we're on distance learning, the things still had to be repaired. It's the old line of throwing your money down the rabbit hole. That's all. But now you have to keep things up because Hopefully they're going to be back in while all this planning is going on. And you say, well, at least you've been maintaining for the time being. But it's not going to get better. It's not going to be a case of we have to start paying the bonds right today or next month, or but to wait until it gets into the election season. Anyway, who knows? We have to be optimistic or cautiously optimistic and say down the road, things just might look up. By the same token, we're going to have to pay the piper one way or the other. And I think they got enough similes and metaphors here, but you have to just grit your teeth and say, keep going right ahead. And as I said in the presentation, you build it, they'll come. Look how people came to Thompson when it finally got worked on. And that's why Pell is filled. And it's in a way, it's a great problem to have. We said that how many years ago? It's better than people just walking away from us. There've been various comments that have been thrown around about, the unfounded comments that people sometimes put on us. And it's just and I'm glad to see, finally, that the system that I put a lot of years into working, finally becoming known and being highly respected in this area. But seriously, if we don't do something about the high school entity, it's going to be throwing good money after bad.
Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, and I want to say that superintendent's presentation made me so hopeful. I thought that it was such a wonderful presentation. And I do want to also point out that when the school construction question was on the ballot, Newport voted in favor of it 84.1%. So I think that's something that's really important to remember as we look at the bond question that is in front of us now. So I'm going to open up to question and comment from the public. And so if you are on your phone and you want to comment, you press *9. And if you are in Zoom, you can click raise hand, and the clerk will be calling you out in the order that you raise your hand. And when you begin, please identify yourself with your name and address.
You have Karen Conway.
Oh, hi. I am Karen Conway, Newport, Rhode Island, 33 Russell Avenue. I also have 3 kids at Thompson right now, and they're struggling with distance learning, but the teachers have been amazing. And I have a son who's starting Rogers in the fall. I am concerned, and big question is, what happens to that building now? I mean, we see it's falling apart. I have to tell everyone, just so they know, that we've already gotten my son's schedule for next year. It is anything and everything I could have hoped for. It is, he's in world history, he's in second year French, he's in geometry. I could not have gotten a better schedule from Bishop Hendricken, from Crouch, from any other school. It's everything that I would want for him. And he has such great friends. I have no problem, no issues at all having him go to Rogers, except for the fear that something might fall on his head or that he'll have an allergic reaction to mold. So what is the plan? I mean, as we know, the building's falling apart. What's the plan for this year? I mean, to me, it's an absolute no-brainer that we need to go forward. I've got 2 more kids coming into that high school after games. What do we do this year?
I'm going to ask the superintendent if she can address this.
Hi, Ms. Conway. We're going to, I hate to use the word, muddle through. We're going to make sure, I know our custodians will do their best. They'll keep the place clean and sanitized as much as possible. We'll continue to watch for any, I'll call it deficiencies that occur. And no matter what, safety is our number one priority, safety and health. So if we have to close down rooms or we have to go to a plan B sooner, meaning reach out to Boys and Girls Club or other facilities, we will do that. We hope we don't do that, but that's just me. The ultimate decision will be with the school committee when and if. Hopefully that doesn't happen this year, but when and if.
Thank you. I would just say we are not in the minority here. We all want a new building. I know some council members say that they're not hearing that. I don't know. I must be on the opposite end of the of town, but I haven't heard anybody against it because yes, it's not just an investment in the high school; it's an investment in the city and growing this city, as we can see with Pell. And, you know, I'm a parent that switched their kids before Clooney closed to Pell and Thompson because of the curriculum, because my kids were getting what they needed there. So thank you, and just please know that we're all pulling for you, and we really want this to happen. And yes, thanks.
Thank you, Karen.
Melissa Denks.
Melissa, you have.
Yes, this is Melissa Danks, 22 Shield Street. I just wanted to say that we moved here about 13 years ago from Massachusetts for my husband's work, and we love it here. We just love Newport, and we settled here before we knew we were having our son. When our son came along, we chose to send him to Pell. We had a lot of choices. We we chose to send him to Pell because we thought he would have the best opportunity for, you know, a diverse and great education. We've not been happier. He is in first grade. He is thriving. I love, you know, the teachers. I love everything about it. I will say though, and I really hate to say this because it would break my heart, but the question was asked, what happens if this fails and what happens if we don't do it? I'm afraid that we would have to move. I can't support a city that won't support a high school. We can't pop tuition out our kids to different high schools. The message that sends is that it's not important. Education is not important. On the topic of regionalization, I went to a regional high school. I had a great opportunity. I would have absolutely loved that to happen. I would have 100% supported that, but it's not going to happen. It's we've tried. Clearly, someone said 11 years. I wasn't aware of that. I've been here 13. It's not happening. So we need to move on. We need to move forward, and we need to give our city, not just our kids, our city, the best options forward. And I think that is a new high school, and it is to build onto Pell. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa.
Next, we have Teresa Mason.
Teresa, you have the floor. I think she may still be muted.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I thought it was a touch screen. It's not. Anyways, I'm Teresa Mason, Terry Mason, 565 Spring Street. I have about 3 comments, and I'd like to keep them brief. The first is, how does a good school system help the community? A good school system is 1,000% necessary, including schools that are safe for the children and schools that the teachers are proud to teach at and the students are proud and feel safe. It just isn't possible to have a strong community and have a lousy school building. high school. It builds stronger citizens. These are the people that are going to be paying for our retirements. They're going to be paying for our Medicare, et cetera. If you don't educate them, and if they feel lousy going to school and skip more classes, et cetera, it's just not a good system. And it makes a weak community. We will be getting more people from Middletown area as far as the Navy goes. A lot of the people are in the Middletown school system, Portsmouth school system, and they've chosen to rent there. So that's one thing we have to keep in mind. And that will be beneficial to our community financially. The other thing is, it's up to you guys, the leaders, and us, the citizens who are committed, to go ahead and lead the constituents into knowing that they just gotta deep six this idea of regionalization, that they gotta deep six the idea of us throwing money down the rabbit hole. It's just not wise. It costs more money in the long run. And I just also want to point out that when it came to the library, those bonds passed very easily. I don't know how many years ago it was, but people were happy about the library. And I hope that we can somehow stimulate our citizens to believe in our schools as much as they do the library. So that's about it for now. And I really appreciate all your dedication. And you guys have made a lot of good points tonight, both sides. Thank you.
Next, we have Ted. Ted, if you could identify your first and last name and your address for the record. Ted, you're unmuted.
Ted, you have only, I'm gonna, if you still want to make a comment, now is the time. Otherwise, we're gonna move on.
Oh, Ted.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can you please identify yourself with your full name and address for the record?
Okay, hi. This is Ted Robo's wife, Donna McCarthy. I'm using his Zoom. Sorry about that. I live at 45 William Street in Newport. And I just have some comments. One, I want to thank people for the presentations. I thought they were excellent and they really helped me understand a lot more about the project. And the only thing here is I'm really struggling to see how we can get this information out to the public. There's only a few calls, and this is great information.
But it needs to get out more, and we need to figure out how to do that. My second point is I think that the council should vote on one question and not split on the ballot. I think both the schools should stand together. We heard tonight how this would financially make sense. And second, educationally, it makes sense. I don't think that we should set up a ballot that runs the risk of having one project fail, one project pass, and then we're back at the beginning. Another point is Rogers needs to go forward. A new high school needs to be built. And I hope that the council and the school committee actively seek to make this happen in Newport. by publicizing it and supporting it broadly. There was any house in Newport that was in the shape that this high school is in, the city would be all over the owner trying to improve it. And lastly, I want to say that we cannot stop this project because of unrealistic dreams about regionalization and about finding some kind of property in the North End that might accommodate the school. Well, I would like that to happen. It's just not going to happen, and we're gonna delay this, and our kids are not going to get the schools that they need. Thank you. Oh, and Ted wants to comment. Hold on.
Hi, folks, and thanks for a chance for me to say something.
Could you identify yourself with your full name before you
this is
comment?
Ted Roble, Donna's husband, Newport. I am a friend of a number of the people who are attempting to get the regionalization question on the ballot in Middletown. And they have been very, very unsuccessful. I don't know what the current count stands at, but the end of February, early March, I talked with one of the leaders, and they had at that point received 700 signatures out of the whole town of Middletown to put the question of talking about regionalization on the ballot. And the group of people who support regionalization in Middletown are quite honest in saying their goal is to stop Newport from going ahead with the rebuild of Rogers, hoping that they can get a new town council voted in Middletown and start the regionalization process all over again. I find that very, very unlikely. Anyway, thank you all, folks, and back to you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to be heard? You can again hit *9 on your phone or raise your hand with the Zoom app. Okay. Oh, there is another person raised their hand.
You have Margaret Martin. You're
Hi, thank you. Most people know me as Maggie. I live at 48 Admiral Calfus Road, and I really do appreciate this presentation tonight. There's been a lot of good information coming out, a good discussion. I just want to say to Jean Marie, my gosh, Jean, I've known you for years, and I know how big your heart is when it comes to the kids, the students in Newport. I do disagree, and I think we should be going forward with the bond, but that doesn't mean that I'm not thankful and grateful for all of the work you've done. I just wanted to mention that in 1985, I think it was 85, maybe 86 when the job was done, but I was a member of the very first comprehensive land use plan. It was the first time, and it was it was a citizens advisory group that did it. And there was so much discussion about regionalization. So I've heard a couple of people tonight talk about the discussions that took place in 2009 about regionalization, and nothing has happened. And I can tell you that at least it goes back to 1985 and probably even before that people were talking about regionalizing the school systems. So I just, as much as I think it makes sense and could be a wonderful way for the whole island to be together, I just don't see it happening. And I do not believe that we can wait. I believe we have to go forward with this. I raised 3 children in Newport. They had great experiences in Newport. They had good teachers, but I will tell you that one of the most important things that I'm the proudest of in Newport is that they understand diversity of cultures. And it is so key, especially looking at what we're looking at now in the world that is so much global. to have a good understanding of being with people that are not the same kind of people, that look the same kind of people as the people they were grown up with. So that's it. I'm hoping that I can be part and help with any kind of campaign to get the bond issue going. So keep that in mind.
Sorry. Thank you, Maggie, for that comment. It was really nice, actually. So I know that there have been some written questions in the Q&A. Some of them have been touched on already, but I'm going to also give the folks the opportunity who did put in their written question in the Q&A. If they want to do it verbally, just raise your hand and we can do that. But I will go down the list. And is the treasurer still on the line?
Yes, Mayor, sorry, I am still here.
Thank you, because a couple of these are directed to you. So
Okay.
two of them are the same, saying, you know, is it true that the treasurer and RIDE structure the incentives to for 80% for regionalization? Is that a better path for the school district?
Yes, well, whether it's a better path, I can't comment on. That's of course up to the communities. I understand that there have been multiple attempts by Newport to engage with other communities on that, but I can't speak to whether that's the right thing to do or not. What I would say at a high level is yes. I mean, I think for many communities, regionalization can be a good thing. I grew up when I was a student in the Bristol public schools. We became the Bristol Warren schools. I was a student there when we regionalized. And so we built, but we also recognized when we were designing the bonus structure that regionalization can be very politically difficult. And so we designed the bonus structure to make regionalization as financially attractive as possible. So there are very generous bonuses for any communities that choose to regionalize. That being said, you know, it takes two to tango, right? And similar to this meeting, I several months ago was invited to speak at a meeting in Middletown with their council, and I came away with the impression that at least for that council, we could increase the bonuses all the way to 100% and build a high school for free, and they still wouldn't have been interested in regionalization. So the answer narrowly is yes, there are generous bonuses for communities that decide to regionalize, but I can't speak to whether that makes sense either for Newport or Middletown. You all would know that, or Portsmouth or anyone else. You all would know that better than me.
Thank you, Treasurer. And I believe, I mean, those incentives expire at the same time as the others, correct?
That is correct, yes.
There's a few more questions that speak to some of them. One was, can Mr. Magaziner speak to the pros / cons of splitting the bond versus keeping it as one? And then there's another question that says, isn't it the best option for our kids in our city to have one ballot question, which results in the highest reimbursement? I think those can be answered together.
Yeah, I think this topic has been well covered tonight, so I don't know that I have much to add. The decision of whether to have one bond question or two, again, is a local decision that I'm not going to advise on one way or the other. I would just repeat what was said earlier, which is that if there are separate questions and one were to fail, particularly if the high school were to fail, it would probably mean a lower bonus amount if you had the Pell School only move forward. But if you had separate questions and they both passed, it would be no different than if it was one question. Again, I think this has been well covered before. I'm not going to advise the city on which path it should take, but if there are any follow-up questions or clarifications, I'm happy to engage.
Thank you. Excuse me. There are a series of questions by one resident that I'm just going to recommend that you send us via email. And if you want to concentrate on one, please raise your hand so that we can address it, because there are way too many. There's like 6 or 7 questions for us to address in this format. But I do see that another audience member has raised their hand. If we could go to that person.
You have William Times.
Mr. Kimes, could you take off mute and then identify yourself with your name and address?
Good evening, Mayor Bova. I did not prepare a question. I am interested in this conversation. I think very thankful to hear from folk. I'm caught a little bit off guard. I can say for sure I'm supportive of one question on the ballot, and I'm not really certain I have seen evidence that this regionalization question is meaningful to students. I do understand it's got some financial benefits to taxpayers, which I recognize, and that's definitely a driver, but we're talking about students first. I was caught a little off guard being brought onto the forum like this, I gotta be honest with you.
Do you have anything else to say? Was that it?
Again, Ms. Bova, I'm sorry. I wasn't prepared to.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I just hope you got cut off. Thank you.
No.
And there is another Q&A question. I just want to remind people I'm reading these questions. I didn't write them. This one is, are the members of the City Council comfortable with continuing to allow our children to ride past multi-million homes and shiny new hotels en route to the worst high school building in the state? I think that conversation has been had, and I appreciate the question. I am going to bring it back, unless there's anyone else from the public that would like to be heard. And again, please do raise your hand if you would like to comment. I'm going to bring it back to the council and the school committee and allow, if anyone has any last comments they want to make. I do want to try to keep it short so we can get out of here at 7:30. Please. Oh, we got another resident. Tom, could you?
We have David. Oh, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that last name. You're unmuted.
Hi, my name is David Kusajani. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I am president of the Teachers Association of Newport. I want to thank all of you for having a great forum this evening. Everyone who spoke did a phenomenal job. Members of the community, school committee members, and certainly Superintendent Jermaine. So I want to be very transparent. I am not a Newport resident, but the city has adopted me since 1997, and I absolutely love teaching in the city. I love the diversity of the city. I love teaching science at Thompson Middle School, and I'm asking respectfully that we keep this one bond, because my greatest fear is that we'll pass the Pell bond and not Rogers. And I think we need a state-of-the-art school, and I do not believe that regionalization is an option at this time. Once again, thank you, and have a great evening.
Thank you. So I'm gonna, I'll have that be the last resident question, and we can turn it back over to city councilors or school committee members. And if And if you want to comment, please raise your hand. And I know that Louisa Boatwright has her hand up. You have to unmute yourself.
Got it. Did I? Okay. I wanted to reiterate something Seth Magaziner said at the beginning. He said he's been very impressed with Newport and the city. We've had a very tough time with COVID, and we will be for a while, but we are also having to deal with critical issues and business of the city. And I think that what we have tried to do in our presentation tonight is show the need. These are needs of the school department and of the students and the families of Newport to have quality school buildings. And we have an opportunity now to get 52.5% in incentives from the state. And I think that it's important that we all work together to try to do the business of the city, which is to have quality schools and school buildings. And this opportunity will go away. And if we split it up, I just think what our presentation today was to say is that we really hope that together the city council and the school committee can march forward on this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from school committee members or city councilors? All right, I just want to say, I think that the approval of this bond will will transform the way our kids learn. This project is about changing the educational experience and environment for our kids. And I think it's so important that we move forward with it as one bond. I think that the residents are really supportive of it. And I think of it as an investment in our kids and an investment in the future of our entire community of Newport. Because like I said, there are so many ways that it's been said multiple times, there are so many ways that this bond as a whole really benefits our community. And I just want to again say thank you to everyone that presented. I was so hopeful when the superintendent was going through her presentation, and I think that it is the ways that we are going to be, that Newport will benefit are so many. But I mean, just from the beginning, having a better school building, we know that there are ways that that's connected to educational outcomes, and we know that educational outcomes are linked to better economic outcomes, and people want to come here. The superintendent said it so well. We're a world-class city. Let's give our kids a world-class education. And I love that the CTE programs can be used for adults as well, like later on. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and another way that we would really benefit from this. And we just have to, I think that it's so important to transform how our kids are learning and make them feel like they have that warm, safe, dry building to come to, and that they want to be in. So I just want to make sure that I state personally that I am 100% behind the bond. And I saw that Councilor McCalla did raise her hand as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Bova. This is Angela McCalla. I just wanted to say thank you to all the presenters tonight. I definitely walked away feeling with a lot more clarity. I think some of the takeaways that really resonated with me is the fact that this is probably the largest reimbursement that's been in the reimbursement rate in the history of Rhode Island. And we're also talking about the lowest interest rate that's ever come before us. I think that just talking talking about our economy and understanding like that we are in peculiar times, but also understanding that we cannot stand paralyzed as well. Understanding, I mean, I think I've also tried to do like a lot of research as well, and understanding too I think the average life expectancy of a school building is something like 50 some odd years, and we're at 63. And the reality is, I think over time, if I'm looking at the schools, and using the analogy of the can, I can't continue to kick the can. The can has holes in it. It's bruised. It's rusted. We can't continue to keep penalizing our kids. I think what I heard from everyone is it's about the value of our kids. It's about making sure that we put them first. So I thank everyone again. I heard everyone, even residents. Thank you very much for participating and really showcasing your voice. So thanks.
Thank you. And I am gonna wrap this up and just say thank you to the General Treasurer, the Finance Director, and the Superintendent for their wonderful, very helpful educational presentations. Thank you to all the supporting staff I see on the line, from the OPM to Jade to Ride. Thank you for being in this meeting. Thank you to the City Council and the school committee. And thank you to all the residents that took the time to be on this call as well. And you can always get in touch with us via phone and email. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.